The House of Commons has voted overwhelmingly in favour of Prime Minister Boris Johnson's Brexit deal, finally paving the way for the United Kingdom to leave the European Union later this month. And after more than 4 decades of membership, the deal has cleared its biggest hurdle with the vote that followed a third reading in Parliament. 330 voted for and 231 against, putting an end to 3 years of political wrangling following the 2016 Brexit referendum. Our UK correspondent Lucy Hough joins us now. A very good evening to you, Lucy, certainly from South Africa. Does this mean that Brexit is now unstoppable?
I think it's safe to say that its path is pretty clear now. I mean, the contrast with this vote in the House of Commons today on Thursday just demonstrates quite a contrast with where we were this time last year. Theresa May, who was paralysed, her Brexit bill repeatedly voted down in the House of Commons, of course, leading eventually to her resignation. Boris Johnson then took over as leader, campaigning in the most recent general election on that clear message, get Brexit done. And we knew that this is a process that he really wanted to expedite. The fact that the bill is already in its third reading in terms of UK parliamentary processes is extraordinarily quick. This is the final stage of the bill in the House of Commons. It now goes to the House of Lords, where peers will make any amendments, but they have been urged by MPs to not do anything that might derail the legislation. And if all goes to plan in the Lords, the bill will become law by the end of the month, just 3 days before our scheduled departure date, which of course is January the 31st. And at that point, the bill then comes here to Brussels for EU leaders to ratify that legislation. And it's then that the formal trade negotiations can begin. So we really are at the start of the process, but this is a hugely significant milestone for the UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson.
Lucy, I want to talk about that significance. You mentioned it earlier on. How different is Boris Johnson's plan from that of his predecessor, Theresa May?
Not all that different, I think, was the sort of analysis. I mean, it's harder. We use these terms hard or soft Brexit. It does diverge or further away. It creates a more distant economic relationship, or that seems to be the outline planned in the legislation. But really, the key change was to the Northern Irish backstop. Of course, the mechanism in Theresa May's deal that caused such problems for her when she tried to get that bill through the House of Commons, Eurosceptic MPs, people who wanted us to leave a clean break Brexit, said that it would make us have too close an economic relationship with the European Union moving forward. What Boris Johnson deals does is it keeps just Northern Ireland in the EU customs union, but there is some fears for the impact on Northern Irish businesses that Boris Johnson's backstop solution might now provide. So there are still some issues, and we have heard from lots of MPs in the Commons today their concerns about Boris Johnson's bill, particularly on the issues like the environment and on citizens' rights. But it has passed with a huge majority of 99, a historic victory for Boris Johnson, who has this very clear mandate after his landslide victory in the last election.
And we'll take a look at what it'll take to hammer out this deal in just a moment. But I want to find out what the reaction has been, just looking at an earlier statement by Hungary's far-right Prime Minister Viktor Orbán. He seemed to endorse the deal, but some of the things that he has said, some people have believed are alarmist and didn't quite agree with. What has been the European reaction to the developments in the UK?
Well, I think the EU is, as Britain is, keen for an end to the paralysis. You know, I've been in the European Parliament today speaking to British and European MEPs who say they felt completely paralysed by this process. You know, British MEPs who've been waiting for months to know whether there might be a second referendum. You know, there have been huge, for businesses on either side, there has been a huge amount of uncertainty. So I think there is cautious optimism from EU leaders that this this might now kickstart the next stage of the process, that there's now no further possibility of a second referendum, that either side know where they are now, and that means that both sides can start the next stage of the process, which is, of course, trying to thrash out a trade deal within just the 11-month period. But that in and of itself is an immensely complex process that I think both sides are going into with some trepidation. Certainly Boris Johnson sees that he will be able to achieve a comprehensive free trade arrangement, but here in Brussels there is caution. They think that the time frame is much too short, that they instead are going to have to work sector by sector on a slimmed down deal to prioritise. Boris Johnson says that he wants to diverge in key sectors, particularly financial services. There was a clear message from the EU President yesterday, Ursula von der Leyen, when she was on a visit to London, that close regulatory alignment was necessary, and should the UK start to take steps further away in regulatory terms, that will cause problems and will lead to a less close economic partnership. So we are certainly looking at tricky times ahead, lots of difficult questions to be asked, and of course just the beginning of what will be a very long and complicated process.
And Lucy, as you say, the Hungarian Prime Minister is saying that it all depends from the prism with which both sides look at this deal, warning European leaders that they don't necessarily have the upper hand, that it's also within their interest that the UK gets what it wants. So some observers believe that it's about to get messier. Is there consensus on this second phase of negotiations?
I think the mood music broadly, well, certainly when Boris Johnson won his majority, there was relief from EU leaders that at last we had a decisive option. Of course, EU leaders don't want to see Britain leave the European Union. There's no two ways around that. They ideally would like the UK to change its mind. But within this deal, within the withdrawal agreement bill, it does address key issues, as we were saying, the Northern Irish Protocol, which resolved the issue of the Northern Irish backstop, but also the issue of citizens' rights. And I think that is a key issue which we'll need to watch over the coming months. Certainly the EU Council President Charles Michel was talking of his concern that would become an issue. Michel Barnier, also the EU's chief negotiator, was saying that this is really something to watch. He is concerned about the rights of EU citizens living and working in Britain. Of course, this bill technically guarantees their rights, but Michel Barnier was saying we really need to make sure that there is a watchdog in place, that those rights are being monitored, that there's a way for EU citizens to complain should they have need to. There is some concern that perhaps some of what is in this withdrawal agreement bill will need to be monitored in the coming months.
I want to ask this question about the blue economy, Lucy. Croatia, for instance, raising the issue of fishing rights, warning that failure to reach agreement or consensus could lead to the cod wars, which were in the 1970s. Is there a lot of wrangling over rights?
Certainly with regards to fishing, yes, that is a key issue. It was one of the key campaign messages of the Leave campaign at the time of the EU referendum. It was one of the key messages that UK fishermen had long been had a disadvantage because of the common fisheries policy. That issue has been separated, and we know that Ursula von der Leyen has said it's one of the two issues that will be the two sectors that will be looked at first during the trade negotiations. That and free tariff trade. That was a clear message from Ursula von der Leyen yesterday. But yes, there was talk. There is clearly concern from the European Union that they might be locked out of fishing in UK waters, which would have huge economic consequences for them. So there is real concern about that issue. It is something that is going to be looked at in a lot of detail in the coming weeks. But there is a lot to do. They're going to be doing a sector by sector piecemeal process. That's what we're hearing from EU officials at the moment. But certainly fishing and free tariff trade are the two central issues to be looked at first. They will then be looking at security and foreign policy. But I think there is concern from all sides about the limited time frame to look at these really important issues that, as you say, affect a number of other EU countries as well.
All right, thank you very much, Lucy Hough, our UK correspondent, speaking to us from Brussels on the latest on that. The House of Commons voting in favour of Boris Johnson's Brexit.